My name is Seraphina. I'm 28, and 3 years ago I made a decision that would expose the true nature of my family in the most devastating way possible. The morning of my wedding, as I stood in my childhood bedroom adjusting my grandmother's pearl necklace, my phone remained silent. No congratulatory texts from my parents, no last-minute motherly advice, no father offering to walk me down the aisle. They were at my brother Camden's golf tournament instead. The same brother who'd had 3 weddings they'd enthusiastically attended. That day, I discovered that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes, the family that hurts you most is the one that raised you. What happened next would shatter every assumption I had about unconditional parental love and teach me that sometimes the sweetest revenge comes wrapped in a luxury car and served ice cold. Before we dive into how I went from the forgotten daughter to the one they desperately wanted back in their lives, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Hit that like button if you're ready for a family revenge story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about parent-child relationships. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, I learned early that love in the Morrison household came with conditions. My parents, Richard and Margaret, had built their entire identity around my older brother Camden's achievements. He was the star quarterback, the valedictorian, the Ivy League graduate who could do no wrong. I was the afterthought, the daughter who tried too hard and never quite measured up to their impossible standards. While Camden received standing ovations for scoring touchdowns, my academic achievements were met with polite nods. When I graduated summa cum laude from Boston University with a degree in computer science they attended, but left early for one of Camden's business dinners, the pattern was so consistent that I'd stopped expecting anything different. I thought I'd accepted my role as the supporting character in the Camden Morrison show. The disparity became more obvious as we entered adulthood. When Camden announced his first engagement to a woman he'd known for 3 months, my parents threw them an elaborate engagement party at the country club. They invited 200 guests, hired a string quartet, and my mother spent weeks planning every detail. When that marriage inevitably crumbled within 18 months, they supported him through the divorce without question. His second wedding was even grander, a destination ceremony in Tuscany that cost them $40,000. When that marriage lasted only 2 years, they were equally supportive during that divorce too. Meanwhile, I'd been with Marcus for 4 years. We'd met during my master's program at MIT, where he was pursuing his doctorate in electrical engineering. Marcus was everything my parents claimed to value: intelligent, ambitious, kind, and from a good family. His father was a respected surgeon, his mother a university professor. He treated me like I was the most important person in the world, something I'd never experienced in my own family. When Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, I was over the moon. I called my parents immediately, expecting at least some enthusiasm. My mother's response was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Have you set a date? Your father and I have Camden's golf season to consider." No congratulations, no excitement, no questions about the ring or how he proposed. Just immediate concerns about how my wedding might interfere with their precious son's schedule. I spent months trying to find a date that would work for everyone. Camden's golf tournaments seemed to span the entire spring and summer. When I finally suggested a fall wedding, my mother sighed heavily and said, "Well, I suppose that could work, though fall is such a dreary time for weddings." Her lack of enthusiasm stung, but I pressed forward, hoping that once the planning began they'd become more involved. They didn't. While I researched venues, tasted cakes, and tried on dresses alone, my mother was busy planning Camden's latest business launch party. When I asked if she wanted to come dress shopping, she said she was too busy but would try to make time later. Later never came. I ended up choosing my wedding dress with Marcus's mother and sister, who were more excited about my wedding than my own family. The guest list became another battleground. My parents insisted on inviting their business associates and country club friends, people I barely knew, while questioning whether some of my closest friends were wedding appropriate. They criticized the venue I'd chosen, a beautiful botanical garden, saying it wasn't formal enough for the Morrison name. They complained about the menu, the flowers, the music, everything. Nothing I did was right, but they weren't offering to help make it better either. 2 months before the wedding, Camden announced he'd made it to some regional golf championship tournament. The tournament was the same weekend as my wedding. I'll never forget the conversation that followed. My father called me into his study, the same room where he'd celebrated Camden's every achievement, and delivered the news like a business transaction. "Seraphina, we have a problem," he said, not looking up from his papers. "Camden's made it to regionals. This is a huge opportunity for him. The tournament is the same weekend as your wedding." I stared at him, waiting for him to suggest a solution, maybe even acknowledge that this was difficult timing. Instead, he continued, "We're going to need to support Camden. This could lead to sponsorship opportunities. You understand, don't you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "Are you asking me to change my wedding date 2 months before the ceremony?" "I'm not asking anything," he replied coldly. "I'm telling you that we won't be able to attend your wedding. Camden needs our support, and frankly, this tournament could open doors for his career. Your wedding is just one day, but this could change Camden's entire future. Just one day. My wedding, the most important day of my life, was just one day to them. But Camden hitting a small ball around a golf course was worthy of their unwavering support. The message was crystal clear: I would never matter as much as their golden child." The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and beautiful, with golden October sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite. I should have been surrounded by family sharing mimosas and last-minute jitters with my mother. Instead, I was getting ready with Marcus's female relatives and my closest friends, trying to pretend that my parents' absence didn't feel like a knife twisting in my chest. My maid of honor, Jessica, tried to keep spirits high, but I could see the anger in her eyes every time someone mentioned my parents. She'd witnessed years of their favoritism and had been furious when I told her they wouldn't be coming. "It's their loss," she kept saying, but we both knew it felt like mine too. The photographer arrived early to capture getting ready moments, and I watched through the viewfinder as Marcus's mother helped me with my veil, knowing these should have been photos of my own mother's hands. Every tradition felt hollow without them there. No mother-daughter moment before walking down the aisle, no father to give me away, no family photos that included the people who raised me. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Have a lovely day, dear. Camden shot an eagle on hole 12. So proud. Sorry we can't be there. Sorry we can't be there." Like they had the flu, instead of choosing to prioritize their son's golf game over their daughter's wedding. The casual tone, the exclamation point about Camden's golf shot, the complete lack of acknowledgement that this was the biggest day of my life. It was exactly the kind of thoughtless cruelty I'd come to expect from them. Walking down that garden path without my father's arm to lean on was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Marcus's father had kindly offered to walk me down the aisle, and while I was grateful for his gesture, it only highlighted what was missing. As I moved toward Marcus, who was waiting for me with tears in his eyes and love written all over his face, I made a silent promise to myself. I was done begging for their attention. I was done accepting crumbs of affection while they showered Camden with unconditional love. The ceremony was beautiful despite their absence. Marcus's family had essentially adopted me, and our friends created an atmosphere of pure joy and celebration. When the officiant asked who gives this woman to be married, Marcus's father stood up and said, "Her chosen family does, with love and pride." The words brought tears to my eyes, not just for their kindness but for the stark contrast they provided to my own family's behavior. During the reception, I found myself watching other families, seeing fathers proudly dancing with their daughters, mothers fussing over wedding dress bustles and makeup touch-ups. The empty table reserved for my parents served as a constant reminder of their choice. When it came time for the parent dances, Marcus danced with his mother while I sat at our sweetheart table, pretending the absence didn't sting. The most painful moment came during the toasts. Marcus's father gave a heartfelt speech about gaining a daughter and how proud they were to welcome me into their family. His words were everything I dreamed of hearing from my own father. When people asked where my parents were, our friends and Marcus's family had clearly been briefed to say they couldn't make it due to a family commitment. The euphemism felt both protective and shameful. Later that evening, as we were cutting the cake, my phone rang. For a split second, my heart leaped, thinking maybe my parents had realized their mistake and were calling to apologize, to at least acknowledge the day. Instead, it was Camden calling to share every detail of his golf tournament. He'd won, of course, and wanted to tell me all about it. He seemed genuinely confused when I cut the call short, apparently having forgotten entirely that it was my wedding day. That night alone with Marcus in our honeymoon suite, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of joy for marrying the man of my dreams, but tears of grief for the family relationships I'd always hoped to have but clearly never would. Marcus held me as I sobbed, promising that his family would always be mine, that I'd never have to face their indifference alone again. But even as he comforted me, I was planning. I was done being the daughter who desperately sought their approval only to be disappointed time and again. If they couldn't see my worth when I was giving them everything, maybe they'd notice when I stopped giving them anything at all. The next phase of my life would be lived entirely for myself and the people who actually valued me. What I didn't realize was that this decision would eventually give me everything I'd ever wanted, and the perfect opportunity for the sweetest revenge. The year following my wedding marked the beginning of my complete transformation, though I didn't realize the magnitude of what I was building at the time. While my parents continued their radio silence, no thank you card for the wedding invitation, no acknowledgement of the beautiful photos I'd sent, nothing. I channeled all my hurt and determination into my career with laser focus. Working at TechVantage, a mid-sized software company in Boston, I'd been developing an innovative AI-driven cybersecurity platform during my off hours. The idea had come to me during my honeymoon when Marcus and I were discussing the vulnerabilities in current security systems. Instead of dwelling on my family's rejection, I poured every ounce of my energy into perfecting this project. The breakthrough came 8 months after my wedding. My algorithm successfully predicted and prevented a major security breach during a live test with one of our clients. The CEO, David Chen, called me into his office the next morning with an expression I couldn't read. For a moment, I wondered if I was in trouble for working on personal projects during company time. "Seraphina," he said, closing the door behind me, "what you've created here is revolutionary. I've never seen anything like it. We want to bring this in-house, build an entire division around your technology. I'm talking about making you Chief Technology Officer of our new cybersecurity arm with a starting salary of $180,000 and equity options that could be worth millions if this takes off the way I think it will." The offer was beyond anything I'd dared to dream. But even more than the money, it was the recognition, the validation, that my work had real value. For the first time in my life, someone was acknowledging my talent without comparing it to Camden's achievements. I accepted immediately, and within 6 months, our new division had landed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. My AI platform was being hailed as a game changer in cybersecurity, and suddenly I was being invited to speak at tech conferences across the country. The financial rewards followed quickly. My base salary jumped to $220,000, and the equity options David had mentioned were looking increasingly valuable as our company's valuation soared. Meanwhile, my parents remained completely unaware of my success. I'd stopped calling them months ago, tired of one-sided conversations where they'd talk about Camden's latest business ventures while showing zero interest in my life. They never called me either, apparently not noticing or caring about our lack of contact. It was both liberating and heartbreaking to realize how little I factored into their daily thoughts. But here's where the story takes a turn that still gives me chills when I think about it. You know how they say success is the best revenge? Well, I was about to learn that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. Because while I was building my empire in Boston, completely cut off from my family's orbit, they were about to get a very rude awakening about exactly who their forgotten daughter had become. The catalyst came in the form of a phone call I received on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 13 months after my wedding. I was in my corner office reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant knocked on my door. "Miss Morrison," she said, "there's a Jennifer Walsh from Connecticut Lifestyle magazine online too. She says it's about featuring you in their Rising Stars Under 30 issue." Connecticut Lifestyle magazine was exactly the kind of publication my parents and their social circle read religiously. They featured prominent business leaders, society events, and the kind of success stories that impressed the country club crowd. Being featured in their pages was like getting a stamp of approval from Connecticut's elite establishment. The interview went better than I could have imagined. Jennifer was fascinated by my journey from MIT graduate to tech innovator, and she seemed particularly interested in the fact that I'd built my success while my family was focused elsewhere. When she asked about my background, I was honest about growing up in Connecticut but kept the details about my family's neglect deliberately vague. "One more question," Jennifer said as we wrapped up. "Our photographer wants to do the shoot at your home, but we'd also like some shots with whatever car you drive. Our readers love those lifestyle details. What are you currently driving?" I glanced out my office window at the parking garage where my reliable Honda Civic sat in its designated spot. It was a perfectly good car, but hardly the kind of vehicle that would impress Connecticut lifestyle readers. An idea began forming in my mind. Reckless, perhaps, but satisfying in a way I couldn't fully explain. Actually, I heard myself saying, "I've been meaning to upgrade. Could we postpone the shoot for 2 weeks? I'd like to have my new car by then." The next day I walked into the Porsche dealership in downtown Boston. I'd been researching luxury cars online, and the Porsche 911 Turbo S had caught my eye. At $135,000, it was more than I'd ever spent on anything except my house, but my recent bonus and stock options meant I could afford it without touching my savings. The salesman, probably expecting me to browse and leave, was shocked when I asked for a test drive and then requested financing paperwork for the full purchase. "Most people need time to think about a decision this big," he said, clearly puzzled by my decisive approach. "I've done my research," I replied, signing the papers with a flourish. "Besides, sometimes the best decisions are the ones that surprise even yourself." 2 weeks later, I stood next to my gleaming silver Porsche as the Connecticut lifestyle photographer snapped away. The car was stunning. All curves and power, a tangible symbol of everything I'd achieved on my own. As I ran my hand along its smooth surface, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with my parents' approval and everything to do with my own accomplishments. The magazine hit newsstands 3 weeks later, and that's when everything changed. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning, jarring me awake in my Boston apartment. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the screen through sleep-clouded eyes. The number was one I recognized but hadn't seen in over 6 months. My mother's cell phone. Seraphina. My mother's voice was pitched higher than usual with an edge of excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Darling, I just saw the most wonderful article about you in Connecticut Lifestyle. Why didn't you tell us about your promotion and that gorgeous car? Your father and I had no idea you were doing so well. I sat up in bed, fully awake, now processing the irony of the moment. For the first time in my adult life, my mother was calling me with genuine enthusiasm in her voice. Not because I'd reached out to them, not because of any effort on their part to maintain a relationship, but because a magazine had validated my success in a way they could understand and show off to their friends. "Hello, Mother," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm surprised to hear from you. It's been quite a while." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her recalculating her approach. "Well, yes, we've all been so busy. But this article, Seraphina, it says you're Chief Technology Officer of your own division. And that beautiful Porsche, a 911 Turbo S. Do you know what those cost?" Of course, she'd looked up the price. My mother had always been impressed by expensive things, and apparently, my success only mattered now that it came with a luxury car and magazine recognition. The woman who couldn't be bothered to attend my wedding was suddenly interested in my life because it reflected well on the Morrison family name. "Yes, I know what it cost," I replied. "I bought it myself." "With your own money?" The surprise in her voice was almost comical. After years of treating me like an afterthought, she genuinely seemed shocked that I'd achieved financial success without their knowledge or assistance. "Yes, Mother. With money I earned from the company I helped build, and the technology I developed. The same career you've never once asked about." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to the artificially warm voice she used when she wanted something. "Well, your father and I would love to hear all about it. Why don't you come home for dinner this weekend? We could celebrate your success properly. I could invite the Hendersons and the Weatherbys. They'd be so impressed to meet our daughter, the tech executive." There it was. She wanted to parade me around like a trophy to bask in reflected glory after years of treating me like I was invisible. The invitation wasn't about reconnecting with their daughter. It was about showing off to their social circle. I'd become useful to them, and suddenly I existed again. "I appreciate the invitation," I said, "but I'm afraid I'm busy this weekend. I have plans with my husband and his family." "Your husband?" She sounded confused, as if she'd forgotten I was married. "Oh yes, Michael, wasn't it Marcus?" I corrected, feeling a familiar stab of hurt. She couldn't even remember my husband's name, despite having been invited to our wedding. "We've been married for over a year now, Mother. We had a lovely ceremony. You would have enjoyed it if you'd been there." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Well, perhaps next weekend then. Or we could meet you in Boston. Your father and I love visiting the city." Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice in the background, clearly agitated. "Is that Seraphina? Let me talk to her." The phone rustled as it changed hands. "Seraphina, congratulations on your success." My father's voice boomed through the speaker, with the hearty enthusiasm he usually reserved for Camden's achievements. "I've already had 3 people from the club mention that article. The Weatherbys said they're looking for cybersecurity consulting for their company. I told them they should definitely consider hiring you." The audacity was breathtaking. He was already positioning himself to benefit from my success, ready to leverage my achievements for his own social and business gain. The man who had told me my wedding was just one day was now treating my career like his personal networking opportunity. "That's interesting, Dad," I said. "I'm curious though. When exactly did you become interested in my career?" Because I don't recall you asking about my work once in the past 5 years. Well, we always knew you were smart, he blustered. We just didn't realize you'd achieved this level of success so quickly. If you'd known what I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. If you'd known I was worth your attention, if you'd known I could make you look good at the country club, because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Seraphina, that's not fair, my mother's voice came through the speaker. She'd moved closer to the phone. We're your parents. We've always supported you. The laugh that escaped me was bitter and sharp. Supported me, mother, you missed my wedding because Camden had a golf tournament. You've never once visited my home, never met my husband properly, never asked about my work until you saw it in a magazine. The only time you call me is when you need something or when I've done something that reflects well on you. That's not true, my father protested, but his voice lacked conviction. We've been busy with our own lives, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. Then prove it, I said, surprising myself with the challenge. Prove that you care about me as a person, not just as a reflection of the Morrison family's success. Because right now it feels like you only remembered I existed when you saw that Porsche in the magazine. The line went quiet for a long moment. When my mother spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. We'd like to try Seraphina. We realize we may have been neglectful. But we're family, surely that means something. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of years of disappointment and hurt. It should mean something, mother. But family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about showing up for each other, supporting each other through good times and bad, choosing to be present in each other's lives. You've never chosen me before. Why should I believe you'd choose me now? 2 weeks later, I found myself driving down the familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood, my Porsche purring beneath me like a satisfied cat. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was returning to the place where I'd always felt small and invisible. But now, I was literally sitting in the driver's seat of my own success. I'd eventually agreed to dinner, but on my terms. Marcus would be joining me and we'd stay in a hotel rather than my childhood bedroom. I wanted the safety net of being able to leave whenever I chose. And I wanted my husband there as both moral support and witness to whatever was about to unfold. The Morrison family home looked exactly the same. A sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured grounds that had always felt more like a museum than a home. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed the curtains in the front window twitch. They'd been watching for me, probably tracking my arrival so they could time their entrance perfectly. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked to the front door. Remember, he said quietly, we don't owe them anything. We're here because you wanted to see if anything had really changed, but we can leave the moment you're uncomfortable. The door opened before we could knock, revealing my mother in a dress I'd never seen before, clearly purchased for the occasion. Behind her stood my father, wearing his most expensive suit and the smile he usually reserved for important business clients. Seraphina, my mother exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt both desperate and performative. You look absolutely radiant. Success certainly suits you. Hello, mother, I replied, accepting the embrace but not returning it with any enthusiasm. Dad. This is my husband, Marcus. My father stepped forward with his hand, extended his politician's smile firmly in place. Marcus, so wonderful to finally meet you properly. We're so sorry we missed the wedding. Unavoidable family commitment, you understand. I watched Marcus's face carefully. He knew exactly what that unavoidable family commitment had been, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Of course, he said diplomatically, shaking my father's hand. Seraphina has told me so much about her family. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone, but my parents chose to interpret it positively. They ushered us into the formal living room, the same space where they'd celebrated every one of Camden's achievements while barely acknowledging mine. Cocktails, my mother asked brightly. I made sure to stock that bourbon you used to enjoy, Seraphina. The fact that she remembered my drink preference from college was both touching and manipulative. She was clearly trying to demonstrate that she'd been paying attention, but the gesture felt hollow given everything else she'd forgotten about my life. As she busied herself with drinks, my father launched into what was obviously a prepared speech. "We want you to know how proud we are of your success," he began, his voice carrying the same tone he used for board presentations. "The Morrison family has always valued achievement and innovation, and you've clearly inherited those traits." "Have I?" I asked, mildly, accepting the bourbon my mother offered. Because I seem to remember those traits being dismissed when they didn't involve golf trophies or football scholarships. My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Darling, you know we've always supported your education. Financially, yes," I interrupted. "But emotionally, when was the last time either of you asked about my work before you saw it in a magazine? When was the last time you showed genuine interest in my life that wasn't related to how it reflected on you?" The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My parents exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to be so direct. They'd probably assumed that my success would make me grateful for their sudden attention, eager to rebuild bridges and forget the past. "We realize we may have been distant," my father said carefully. "But we're here now, aren't we? We're trying to make an effort." "Are you?" I leaned forward in my chair, studying their faces. "Or are you here because your daughter's success story is useful to you? Because you can now brag about your tech executive daughter at the country club? Because my Porsche makes for good conversation at your dinner parties?" My mother's composure cracked slightly. "That's not fair, Seraphina. Yes, we're proud of what you've accomplished. And yes, we'd like our friends to know about your success. But that doesn't mean our feelings aren't genuine." "Then, tell me," I said, setting down my glass with deliberate precision. "What do you know about my life right now? What do you know about Marcus's work? About our home? About our plans for the future? What do you know about me?" "Wasn't in that magazine article." The silence stretched uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat and said, "Well, we know you're doing important work in technology." "Dad," I said quietly, "you can't even remember what kind of technology. You have no idea what my company does, what my role involves, or why my work matters. You know I have a fancy title and an expensive car, and that's literally all you know about my adult life." Marcus reached over and took my hand, offering silent support. I could see my parents noticing the gesture, probably filing away the observation that my husband was protective of me, that he knew things about their family dynamics they'd assumed I'd never shared. "What about you, Mother?" I continued. "Can you tell me when my husband and I bought our house? Do you know what neighborhood we live in? Have you ever asked to see photos of our home? Do you know what Marcus does for work?" My mother opened her mouth and then closed it again, clearly struggling. Finally, she said, "He's in engineering, isn't he?" "Electrical engineering," Marcus said quietly. "I'm finishing my doctorate at MIT while working for a renewable energy startup. We've been together for 6 years, married for 14 months. We live in a townhouse in Cambridge that Seraphina bought before we were married. We have a dog named Tesla, and we're hoping to start a family in the next few years." The information hung in the air like an indictment. These were basic facts about their daughter's life, things any involved parent would know, and my parents were hearing them for the first time from my husband. "We want to know these things," my mother said, her voice smaller now, more vulnerable. "We want to be part of your life, Seraphina. We don't know how to start." For a moment I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. but then my father ruined it. Speaking of starting, he said, his businessman persona reasserting itself. I've been thinking about how we could leverage your success for the family. The Morrison name carries weight in Connecticut business circles, and with your tech expertise, we could really make an impact. I've already had inquiries from 3 companies looking for cybersecurity consulting. And there it was. Even in this moment of supposed reconciliation, he couldn't resist turning my achievements into his opportunity. I wasn't their daughter who deserved love and support. I was a business asset, to be leveraged for family gain. I stood up slowly, Marcus immediately rising beside me. Thank you for dinner, I said formally. But I think we'll be leaving now. Seraphina, wait, my mother said, panic creeping into her voice. We haven't even eaten yet. I made your favorite, you don't know what my favorite anything is. I said, not unkindly but with finality. And that's the problem. You want the benefits of having a successful daughter without ever having invested in actually knowing that daughter. As we walked toward the door, my father called after us. You're being unreasonable, Seraphina. We're trying here. I turned back to face them one last time. No, Dad, you're performing. There's a difference. The final chapter of this story began 6 months later with another phone call, but this one wasn't from my parents. It was from Camden himself, and his tone was decidedly different from the confident, entitled voice I'd grown up hearing. Sarah, he said, using the childhood nickname he'd abandoned years ago when calling me, became beneath his social status. We need to talk. I was in my office reviewing contracts for a major expansion of our cybersecurity division. My company had just been acquired by a tech giant for $47 million, making my equity stake worth more than I'd ever imagined possible. But Camden didn't know any of that yet. That particular piece of news hadn't hit the business journals. Hello, Camden, I said, not bothering to hide my surprise. This is unexpected. I think this is the first time you've called me in. What, 3 years? Look, I know we haven't talked much lately, he began, his voice carrying an edge of desperation I'd never heard before, but I'm in a bit of a situation and I was hoping you might be able to help. The irony was delicious. The golden child, the one who'd always had our parents' unwavering support and financial backing, was calling his forgotten sister for help. I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious about what had brought him to this point. What kind of situation? I asked. It's the business, he said, his voice deflating. The golf course management company I started 3 years ago. It's failing. Badly. We've lost 6 major accounts in the past 4 months, and we're facing bankruptcy. I've been trying to get investors interested, but no one wants to touch us. I remembered the business launch party my parents had thrown for him, the one that had been deemed more important than helping me plan my wedding. They'd invested $200,000 of their own money and had pressured every friend and business associate to become clients. For months afterward, I'd heard nothing but praise for Camden's entrepreneurial spirit. That's unfortunate, I said carefully. But I'm not sure how I can help. I don't know anything about golf course management. It's not about golf, he said quickly. It's about the business side. You've got this tech background now, and I thought, maybe you could consult for us, help us figure out what we're doing wrong. I saw that article about you, and Mom and Dad keep talking about how successful you've become. There it was. The family had been talking about me, but only in the context of how my success might benefit Camden. Even now, when he was desperate enough to call me himself, it wasn't because he valued me as a sister. It was because he saw me as a potential solution to his problems. Camden, I said slowly, when was the last time you and I had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked about my life that wasn't related to what I could do for you? There was a long pause. I know I haven't been the best brother, he admitted. But we're family, Sarah. Family helps family, right? The audacity was breathtaking. The same family that had skipped my wedding for his golf tournament was now invoking family loyalty when they needed something from me. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply amazed by the predictability of it all. "You're right," I said. "Family should help family." Where was that philosophy when I needed support? Where was it when I was planning my wedding alone? Where was it during any of the major moments in my adult life? "Look, I know Mom and Dad messed up with your wedding," he said, his voice gaining momentum. "But that's between you and them. This is between us as siblings. I'm asking for your help, Sarah. Please." I almost laughed at the desperation in his voice. This was the same brother who'd called me on my wedding night to brag about his golf victory, apparently having forgotten entirely that I'd gotten married that day. Now he wanted to separate his request from our parents' behavior, as if his own indifference to my life existed in a vacuum. "Tell me, Camden," I said, "do you know what kind of technology company I work for? It's cybersecurity, right? Do you know my husband's name?" Another pause. Mike Marcus." "Do you know when we got married last year sometime?" 14 months ago. "You called me that night to tell me about your golf tournament. Do you remember that?" The silence on the other end told me he didn't remember, or if he did, he was finally understanding how that looked. But I wasn't done. "Do you know where we live? Do you know that we bought a house? Do you know that we have a dog? Do you know anything about my life that doesn't involve my bank account or my professional connections, Sarah?" The answer is no, I continued. "You don't know any of those things because you've never cared enough to ask. Just like Mom and Dad, you only see me as useful when you need something. You want me to save your failing business, but you can't even remember my husband's name." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "You're right," he said. "I've been a terrible brother. I've been selfish and self-centered, and I've taken you for granted my whole life. But I'm asking you to help me anyway, not because I deserve it, but because I don't know what else to do." For a moment I felt something that might have been pity. Camden had been raised to believe the world revolved around him, that his success was inevitable, and his family's support was guaranteed. Now he was facing real failure for the first time in his life, and he had no idea how to handle it. "I'm not going to help save your business, Camden," I said quietly. "But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll give you some free advice, the same advice I wish someone had given me years ago." "Okay," he said, hope creeping back into his voice. "Stop expecting other people to fix your problems. Stop assuming that family loyalty is a one-way street that flows toward you. If you want relationships with people, you have to invest in them before you need them. And most importantly, learn to value people for who they are, not just for what they can do for you." I paused, then added, "If you ever want to build a real relationship with me, you're welcome to try. But it starts with you actually caring about my life, not just my professional connections. It starts with you treating me like a sister, not like a business resource." The line was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Camden said, "I understand. And Sarah, I really am sorry. For all of it." "I know you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't fix years of neglect. Actions do." After hanging up, I sat in my office looking out at the Boston skyline and reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed. 2 years ago, I'd been desperately seeking my family's approval, willing to accept crumbs of attention and affection. Now, I was in a position of power, and they were the ones seeking my approval. The sweetest part of the revenge wasn't the money or the success. It was the knowledge that I'd built this life entirely without them. Every achievement, every breakthrough, every moment of joy had happened because I'd chosen to invest in people who valued me, and because I'd learned to value myself. My parents continued to call periodically, usually when they wanted to show me off to their friends, or when they thought my connections might benefit them somehow. I was polite but distant, treating them exactly the way they'd treated me for years, with surface-level courtesy and no real emotional investment. Camden's business did eventually fail, and my parents had to absorb significant financial losses from their investment. According to the Family Gossip Network, Marcus's mother was friends with several Connecticut families. They'd had to downsize their lifestyle considerably. The irony wasn't lost on me that their golden child had cost them far more money than their forgotten daughter ever had. But here's the most important part of this story. The real victory wasn't in their failure or their newfound desire for my attention. It was in the life I'd built for myself. Marcus and I did start that family we'd planned. Our daughter Emma was born last spring, surrounded by love from the family we'd chosen. My in-laws are devoted grandparents who show up for every milestone, big and small. My parents asked to visit when Emma was born, and I allowed it, but on my terms. They met their granddaughter in my home, surrounded by photos of the life they'd missed out on. I watched my mother hold Emma and saw something like regret in her eyes, but I felt only peace. So here's my question for all of you who've made it to the end of this journey with me. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who only valued you when it benefited them? How did you handle situations where blood to relations expected your loyalty without offering theirs in return? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing thing is knowing we're not alone in these experiences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama and lessons learned the hard way. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them, even if those others are family. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and choosing the people who choose you back. Life has a funny way of evening the score when you stop keeping track and start building something beautiful for yourself. The karma in this story wasn't just about my family realizing what they'd lost. It was about me discovering what I'd gained by learning to love and value myself enough to demand the same from others. That's a lesson worth more than any Porsche, and it's one that no one can ever take away from you.